I'm back. Holy carpet. Where is that? At last, Brisas, the blonde, dropped Haynes in the parking lot, though not until they stood beside her car for at least 5 minutes, holding each other's asses and soul kissing in broad daylight. Vince was dismayed. He expected Haynes to have a stronger sense of propriety. After all, the man had a doctorate. If educated people did not uphold traditional standards of conduct, who would? Weren't they teaching manners and deportment in the university these days? No wonder the world got ruder and cruder every year. The blonde departed in her Porsche, and Haynes left the lot in a white Mercedes 560 SL Sports Coupe. It sure wasn't a rental, and Vince wondered where the doctor had gone it. Haynes checked his car with the valet and at another hotel, as did Vince. He tailed the doctor through the lobby, out to the beach, where at first they seemed embarked on an uneventful stroll along the shore. But Haynes settled down beside a gorgeous Mexican girl in a strong bikini. She was dark, superbly proportioned, and 15 years younger than the doctor. She was sunbathing on a lounge, her eyes closed. Haynes kissed her throat, startling her. Evidently, she knew him, for she threw her arms around him, laughing. Vince walked down the beach and back, then sat on the sand behind Haynes and the girl. With the pair of sunbathers interposed between them, he was not concerned that Haynes would notice him. The doctor seemed to have eyes only for choice female anatomy. Besides, in spite of his size, Vince Nasco had a knack for fading into the background. Out on the bay, a tourist was taking a parachute ride, hanging high in the air behind the towboat. Sun fell like an endless rain of gold doubloons on the sand and the sea. After 20 minutes, Haynes kissed the girl on the lips and on the slopes of her breasts, then set off back the way he had came. The girl called out, "Tonight at 6." And Haynes said, "I'll be there." Then Haynes and Vince went for a pleasure drive. At first, Vince thought Haynes had a destination in mind, but after a while, it seemed they were just heading aimlessly down the coast road, taking in the scenery. They passed Revolcadero Beach and kept going. Haynes in his white Mercedes, Vince following as far back as he dared in his Ford. Eventually, they came to a scenic overlook where Haynes pulled off the road and parked beside a car from which four garishly dressed tourists were emerging. Vince parked too and walked to the iron railing at the outer edge of the escarpment, where there was a truly magnificent view of the coastline and of waves breaking thunderously on the rocky shore more than 100 feet below. The tourists, in their parachutes and striped pants, finished exclaiming over the sights, took their last pictures, discarded their last bits of glitter, and departed, leaving Vince and Haynes alone on the cliff. The only traffic on the highway was an approaching black Trans Am. Vince was waiting for the car to pass, that he was going to take Haynes by surprise. Instead of going by, the Trans Am pulled off the road and parked beside Haynes' Mercedes, and a gorgeous girl about 25 got out. She hurried to Haynes. She looked Mexican, but with the measure of Chinese blood. very excited. She was wearing a white halter top and white shorts, and she had the best legs Vince had ever seen. She and Haynes moved farther along the railing until they were about 40 feet from Vince, where they went into a clinch that made Vince blush. For the next few minutes, Vince edged along the railing toward them, leaning out dangerously now and then, craning his neck to gawk down at the crashing waves that threw water 20 feet into the air, saying, "Ooh boy." When a partic- when a particularly big breaker hit the craggy outcroppings of stone, trying to make it look as if his movement in their direction was entirely innocent. Though they had turned their backs to him, the breeze carried bits of their conversation. The woman seemed worried that her husband might find out that Haynes was in town, and Haynes was pushing her to make up her mind about tomorrow night. The guy was shameless. The highway cleared off traffic again. The highway cleared off traffic again. The highway cleared off traffic again, and Vince decided he might not get another opportunity to nail Haynes. He closed the last few feet but between him and the girl, grabbed her by the nape of the neck and the belt of her shorts, plucked her off the ground, and threw her over the railing. Screaming, she plummeted toward the rocks below. It happened so fast that Haynes didn't even have the time to react. The instant the woman was airborne, Vince turned on the startled doctor and punched him in the face twice, splitting both his lips, breaking his nose, and knocking him unconscious. As Haynes crumpled to the ground, the woman hit the rocks below, and Vince received her gift even at the distance. Snap. He would have liked to lean over the railing to take a long look at her shattered body on the rocks down there, but unfortunately, he had no time to spare. The highway would not long be free of traffic. He carried Haynes back to the Ford and put him in the front seat, letting him slump against the door as if sleeping peacefully. He made sure the man's head tiptoed. He made sure the man's head tipped back to let the blood from his nose trickle down his throat. From the coast highway, which was twisty and frequently in poor repair for such a major route, Vince followed a series of lesser unpaved roads, each narrower and more rugged than the one before, traveling from gravel to dirt surfaces, heading deeper into the rainforest, until he came to a lonely dead end at a green wall of immense trees and lush vegetation. Twice during the drive, Haynes had begun to regain consciousness, but Vince had quieted the doctor by thumping his head against the dashboard. Now, he dragged the unconscious man out of the Ford, though through a gap in the brush and deep under the trees, until he found a shady clearing floored with hairy moss. Cawing and trilling birds fell silent, and unknown animals with peculiar voices moved off through the underbush. Large insects, including a beetle as big as Vince's hand, scuttled out of his way, and lizards scampered up tree trunks. Vince returned to the Ford, where he had left some interrogation equipment in the trunk. A packet. Oh my gosh, I have a bad headache. I gotta go play soccer too. be this hard. It's not that hard. A packet of syringes. Stop one. A pack of syringes and two vials of sodium pentothal. A packet of syringes and 2 vials of sodium pentothal. What is this trying to do? A leather sap weighted with lead pallets, a hand-applied taser that resembled a remote control device for a television set, and a corkscrew with a wooden handle. Lawton Haynes was still unconscious when Vince returned to the clearing. His breath rattled in his broken nose. Haynes should have been dead 24 hours ago. The people who had employed Vince for 3 jobs yesterday had expected to use another freelancer who lived in Acapulco and operated throughout Mexico. But that guy had died yesterday morning when a long-awaited airmail package from Fortnum and Mason in London surprisingly contained 2 pounds of plastic explosives instead of assorted jellies and marmalades. Out of desperate necessity, the outfit in Los Angeles had given the job to Vince. Though he was getting to be dangerously overworked, it was a big break for him, for he was sure this doctor must also be connected with Benodyne Laboratories and could provide more details about the Francis project. Now exploring the rainforest around the clearing where Haynes lay, Vince found a fallen tree from which he was able to pull off a loose, curved section of thick bark that would serve as a ladder. He located an algae mottled stream and scooped up nearly a quart of water in a bark vessel. The stuff looked foul, no telling what exotic bacteria thrived in it. But of course, at this point, the possibility of disease would not matter to Haynes. Vince threw the first ladder of water in Haynes' face. A minute later, he returned with the second scoopful from which he forced the doctor to drink. After a lot of spluttering, choking, gagging, and little vomiting, Haynes was at last clear-headed enough to understand what was being said to him and to respond intelligibly holding up the ladder sap, the taser, and the corkscrew. Holding up the leather sap, the taser, and the corkscrew, Vince explained how he'd use each of them if Haynes was uncooperative. The doctor, who revealed himself to be a specialist in brain physiology and function, proved more intelligent than patriotic, and he eagerly divulged every detail of the top secret defense work in which he was engaged at Benodyne. I should feel sick, but I have to go out and play. I haven't gotten touch it in a minute. When Haynes swore there was no more to be told, Vince prepared the sodium pentothal. As he drew the drug into the syringe, he said, conversationally, "Doctor, what is it with you and women?" Haynes, lying on his back in the hairy moss with his arms at his sides, exactly as Vince had told him to lie, was not able to adjust quickly to the change of subject. He blinked in confusion. "I have been following you since lunch, and I know you got 3 of them on a string in Acapulco." "4," Haynes said, and in spite of his terror, a visible pride surfaced. "That Mercedes I'm driving belongs to to Giselle, the sweetest little. You're using one woman's car to cheat on her with three others? Haynes nodded and tried to smile, but he winced as the smile sent waves of pain through his nose. I've always had this way with the ladies. For God's sake, for God's sake, Vince was appalled. Don't you realize these aren't the 60s or 70s anymore? Free love's dead. It's got a price now. Steep price. Haven't you heard about herpes, AIDS, all that stuff? Administering the pentothal, he said, you must be a carrier for every venereal disease known to man. Blinking stupidly at him, Haynes at first looked baffled and then was deep in a pentothal sleep. Under the drug, he confirmed all that he had already told Vince about Benodine at the Francis Project. When the drug wore off, Vince used the taser on Haynes just for the fun of it until the batteries were out. The scientist twitched and kicked like a half-crushed water bug, back-bowed, digging at the moss with his heels and head and hands. When the taser was of no further use, Vince beat him unconscious with the letter sap and killed him by applying the corkscrew to the space between two ribs, angling it up into the beating heart. Snap. Throughout a sepulchral silence hung over the rainforest, but Vince sensed 1,000 eyes watching, the eyes of wild things. He believed that the hidden watchers approved of what he had done to Haynes because the scientist's lifestyle made him an affront to the natural order of things, the natural order that all creatures of Judge obeyed. He said thank you to Haynes, but he did not kiss the man, not on the mouth, not even on the forehead. Haynes' life energy was as invigorating and welcome as anyone's, but his body and spirit were unclean. 4. Nora went straight home from the park. The mood was adventure and the spirit of freedom that had colored the morning. The mood of adventure and the spirit of freedom that had colored the morning and the early afternoon could not be recaptured. Streck had sullied the day. Closing the front door behind her, she engaged the regular lock, the deadbolt lock, and the brass safety chain. She went through the downstairs rooms, drawing the drapes tightly shut at all the windows to prevent Arthur Streck from seeing inside if he should come prowling around. But she could not tolerate the resultant darkness, so she turned on every lamp in every room. In the kitchen, she closed the shutters and checked the lock on the back door. Her contact with Streck had not only terrified her, but had left her feeling dirty. More than anything, she wanted a long, hot shower. But her legs were suddenly shaky and weak, and she was seized by a spell of dizziness. She had to grab hold of the kitchen table to steady herself. She knew she would fall if she tried to climb the stairs just then. So she sat down, folded her arms on the table, put her head in her arms, and waited until she felt better. When the worst of the dizziness passed, she remembered the bottle of brandy in the cupboard by the refrigerator, and she decided to drink. And she decided a drink might help steady her. She had bought the brandy, Remy Martin, after Violet had died because Violet had not approved of any stronger drink than partially fermented apple cider. As an act of rebellion, Nora had poured a glass of brandy for herself, and when she had come home from her aunt's funeral, she had not enjoyed it and had emptied most of the contents of the glass down the drain. But now it seemed that a shot of brandy would stop her shivering. First, she went to the sink and washed her hands repeatedly under the hottest water she could tolerate, using both soap and then a lot of ivory dishwashing liquid, scrubbing away every trace of streak. When she was done, her hands were red and looked raw. She brought the brandy bottle and the glass to the table. She had read books in which characters had sat down with the fifth of booze and a heavy load of despair, determined to use the former to wash away the latter. Sometimes it worked for them, so maybe it would work for her. If brandy could improve her state of mind even marginally, she was prepared to drink the whole damn bottle. But she did not have it in her to be a lush. She spent the next 2 hours sipping at a single glass of Remy Martin. When she tried to turn her mind away from thoughts of Streck, she was relentlessly tormented by memories of Aunt Violet. And when she tried not to think of Violet, she was right back to Streck again. And when she forced herself to put both of them out of her mind, she thought of Travis Cornell, the man in the park, and dwelling on him gave her no comfort either. He had seemed nice, gentle, polite, concerned, and he had gotten rid of Streck. But he was probably just as bad as Streck. If she gave him half a chance, Cornell would probably take advantage of her the same way Streck was trying to do. Aunt Violet had been a tyrant, twisted and sick, but increasingly it seemed that she had been right about the dangers of interacting with other people. Ah, but the dog. That was a different story. She had not been afraid of the dog, not even when he had dashed toward the park bench, barking ferociously. Somehow, she knew that the retriever Einstein, his master had called him, was not barking at her, that his anger was focused on Streck. Clinging to Einstein, she felt safe, protected, even with Streck still looming over her. Maybe she should get a dog of her own. Violet abhorred the very idea of house pets, but Violet was dead, forever dead, and there was nothing to prevent Nora from having a dog of her own. Except, I'm gonna leave it right there. So a quick recap of what I read. Vince was following his victim, Haynes. Haynes is another doctor that Vince was closely following. On the mission, Vince saw that Haynes was also a player, played all his women. So it kind of took a bit for Vince to take action and finish what he had came to do. But at the end, Vince got the job done. Now, I don't know how Vince is judging even Haynes, because he's not any better of a person. He's not any better of a person, to be honest. Also read a little bit about Nora. Got back home after the interaction with Streck in the outside. Got back home, closed all the doors, and couldn't get Streck or her dead aunt out of her mind, because she's stressed out, and even drinking is not helping her. So now she's just trying to drink as much to get the thoughts out of her head, to just relax and chill. But yeah, that's a little bit of what I read. That's the recap.